Greetings everyone, welcome to an all-new edition of the Golden Standard, the official comic book review series of the Golden Age 1942. We have got a huge episode of the Golden Standard ready for you today. So huge, so epic, you'll have to binge watch it in 2 parts. And that's perfectly fitting because today we're talking about the new Binge book line of comics from the new publishing company Sitcomics. And folks, we are the only store in Tennessee that you can get these awesome books. So you're going to want to stick around and listen up. Joining us today all the way from Los Angeles, California on speakerphone, he is the publisher, creator, and writer of Sitcomics in the new Binge book format, Darin Henry. Ladies and gentlemen, Darin Henry. Darin, thanks for coming out with us today on speakerphone.
I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm hopeful that I'll be able to be there in person at some point this year. But in the meantime, I'm glad to get this chance to talk to everybody there.
Yes, awesome. We're so happy to have you on the show today, and we're so excited about your line of comics. For those of you who don't know, Darin Henry is a television writer turned comic book producer. He is the founder of Sitcomics, which is an exciting and unique line of comic books that we have. We're the only store in Tennessee that are selling these comics. We're really excited, very honored to have them on our shelves. Darin, tell us a little bit about your background as a television writer.
It was 1992 that I first decided to drive to California to become a writer, and I was lucky enough to have been working in Pennsylvania in television and public television there. I had been a big Britcom fan and a Doctor Who fan, so that was what sort of put public TV on my radar as a younger, teenager and into my, college years. So I sort of navigated to that TV station and found my way in there. And it turned out that the work I put in over the course of my years in college really paid off, because right before I decided to move to LA, I told some of the folks at that TV station that I had decided to write sitcoms, and they mentioned 2 people who had come through Harrisburg and who were there at that time working in Hollywood, and one of them was Carmen Finestra, whose show Home Improvement had just started the year before. He actually grew up in that area of Pennsylvania near Harrisburg. And then the person who I work with in Harrisburg mentioned one other name, and it was Tom Sharonis, and my eyes just totally lit up because that was the director of Seinfeld, and it turned out he also had come through that same TV station even before I was born, and he had met his wife in the area, and he still had ties to the area. And it turned out he was not just the director of Seinfeld, but he had a friend in common who was willing to call up and mention me as someone who might be worth giving a chance in Hollywood. And it turned out that's exactly what happened. And within a few weeks of that conversation, I was on the set of Seinfeld. And within a few days of that, I got hired to be a part-time production assistant. So that's sort of my origin story as far as getting out to Hollywood. Obviously, I ended up doing a lot of different television shows over the course of more than 2 decades. I got actually staffed as a writer on The Muppets, which led me to be on Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld's radar as someone who actually was a writer as much as an assistant. And then I got hired by Jerry to write episodes in the last 2 seasons of Seinfeld. And then my career just has continued. And that's really the way into Hollywood, is to just sort of have connections with people even before you know that they're connections that could pay off later, and you work really hard, and that was my sort of story of getting in the front door.
You've basically taken your knowledge and your craft of TV writing, and you've brought it into the medium of comic books, and in doing so, you've created something new, something called the Binge book. Now, I can tell everybody what this is, but I'm going to let you go ahead and explain to us what the Binge book concept is.
Well, it's the idea is to give a complete story with everything that you buy. I mean, every other form of media is sort of gravitating toward this binge model where, shows that may be produced over the course of 6 months to a year aren't actually put out and put on Netflix until they're all completed, and then an audience can just enjoy them all at once. And the other aspect of the Binge book is the price. And, just to finish that, the Binge book that I publish, they are all self-contained stories. So as frustrating as sometimes comics can be, where you serialize stories so that for the publisher's point of view, they can be put out in serialized form, but then they can sell them to the same audience again in the trade paperback. I sort of tried to make a product that takes the best of both of those worlds, where you get the affordability and the sort of format of a saddle-stitched comic, but by giving 64 pages, you get the reading satisfaction of a trade paperback. The price that you pay, though, for a trade paperback is more than most general audiences would pay. It helps to be a fan. You put up with things that most people wouldn't because you're a fan of that product or that character, so you're willing to take those additional steps. But frankly, I don't think most people are going to do that now. So I definitely feel like my books are not just for comic book readers, but for people who just want to be entertained, whether they are familiar with comic book characters or not. The price is another thing. I feel very little of what people are consuming for entertainment is actually paid for. Individual products, I mean, like you don't pay for a TV show anymore. You pay for a subscription service that lets you watch one of hundreds or thousands of TV shows or movies. And so you don't think of putting money into the purchase of any of your entertainment in other ways of consuming them. And comics they're sticking to this model that, obviously works, I guess, for the publishers, but I don't think it really takes into account the changing world that we're living in and the way people are just trying to get their entertainment in, the cheapest way possible and make it as good as it can possibly be and make it as easy to access. And, that's the idea behind the Binge book, is giving 64 pages of full-color story and art for $3.99, which is making it like a three issues for the price of one.
Yeah, and they are entertaining. Like I said, I'm gonna show off one of these books real quick. I got probably one of my favorites here is Z People. And folks, if you take a look at this, I mean, these things, like when you grab them off the shelf, like I said, 64 pages, like they're heavy. They are just chocked full, and I'm just gonna kind of flip through and show of just, like I said, no ads. Just nothing but beautiful artwork that really energizes and tells the story in a fun way. You've got sit commercials in these things, and I think they're fun, and you get like a different little piece of artwork. It's like you're just, you've got so much content in this book. I applaud you for that. The sit commercials I really enjoy because it kind of switches it up a little bit. You get something different. I've read all the titles that we have here in the store. I noticed that, the frequency of the sit commercials is kind of like in one of the books, you had like 2 or 3 in the middle of the book, and then you had some at the end of the book. Is that something you're kind of playing with, like the placement of the sit commercials?
Well, I mean, it's harder to feel like the sit commercials, even though I do try to write for almost like I'm writing like a TV thing where I write for the commercial break and you try to give a good compelling act break moment that will make you want to continue reading, but also give you a sort of break in the action. I'm finding that it's less fun to have those in the superhero books, and so I don't necessarily feel like that kind of the tone of the sit commercials is always humorous, whereas the superhero books I have high concept in a comedic way premises for the superhero books, but they're not necessarily as easy to make the fit with the straight out comedy of the commercials.
Gotcha.
So it's just me figuring it out, as you say.
Yeah.
And sometimes I also feel like I need to tell stories that if there are 3 acts, I try to get 20 pages per act, because then I do not sell the Binge books digitally, but I do break them into chapters for digital consumption. So it's just one of those other things where if I want to give a satisfying digital chapter, I kind of need to give that 20 pages to telling the story and not the commercials so much. So it's not that I won't be putting more commercials together. It's also a different comedy muscle that I don't necessarily have as much experience in. I'm used to telling full stories, and sometimes, the idea of coming up with a commercial, it just takes that moment of inspiration, and I don't always have time to do that when I'm trying to get the other stories to make sense and to be entertaining as well.
Now there were some sit commercials that there were a couple that come to mind that seemed to be like an advertisement for upcoming sitcomics. This is just me asking as a fan. Were those real or were those fictitious? I think one of them was something about some mice or something.
Yeah, the lab mice.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a fun one. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I could do more of that stuff. It just depends on it. I think it could be a fun soap opera.
Yeah.
A comedy soap opera, but I'm not sure. It just is just where I want to invest the time and money because, you know, I've always just been, up until I started publishing, I've been the person who, you know, my job is to entertain as many people as I can, and I get paid by a production company, so I don't really have the same amount of control over what I end up putting on television that I have when I create my comics. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I do see their side of things. As a producer, you have to decide where you're going to put your money and your time. Mm-hmm. And you can't just do everything that you think is fun. You also have to sort of make sure you're not overcommitting to something that you don't necessarily have enough material to enjoy, make it fully satisfying in a longer story. It's really all just where I feel like I can make the most bang for my buck and get the audience a really good and entertaining product. I could see doing more of those quick one-pagers for the lab mice. Mm-hmm. I could see doing a lot longer story. It just depends on how it sort of plays out. And I try not to with the comics. I try not to force myself to do anything. I try to just make the best story that I can, and let it take over as it's developing.
So have you always had a passion for storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, comics were definitely the first. You know, before VCRs and before the internet, the only way you could watch something again, at least in television, was to wait for a rerun. But at least with comics, that was like the only visual entertainment where you could control when and where you'd watch it, and when you consume it. So I was a big comic book buyer. I mean, I found them somewhere, like in department store 3-packs, I'd say, was the main way of getting them. The book and records that Marvel Comics had made also really captured my imagination. And I turned into a storyteller through comics. I mean, some of the earliest things I ever created were comic books that I'd drawn and wrote myself, and I was like 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a way to express myself. I never had a real desire to draw Spider-Man comics, even though I'd read them, or Avengers comics. It was always about creating my own characters. And I still have all those comics, and they were all original characters. And I think that has sort of colored why I'm more interested in telling stories with original characters than with taking someone else's and just carrying the torch, as it were.
Yeah, I gotta say, with the new Binge books, I mean, that you've got out now with Sitcomics, I mean, you've definitely got some original characters. The way I like to describe it, I mean, there's basically something for everyone in each of these Sitcomics books. And even if it's a title that, you know, you think, well, maybe I might not be into that, I would encourage everyone to pick up something that, you know, for instance, I picked up Bloodsuckers. You know, I'm not much of a vampire guy, but I found it hilarious. There's something for everyone in each of these books. If you think outside your box, grab one of these books.
Yeah, let me just speak to that for a brief moment. I feel like the thing about what I've been doing over 20 years in television is I've always sort of tried to speak to all audiences. I'm a very mainstream person when it comes to how I see how what I create should be consumed, and I don't really like to think of it as for any specific demographic or for anybody. I just try to tell stories that I feel like if you actually invest time in them, you'll get something out of them. And you know, I think that I don't have any real strong opinions about comics as they are being done by other people, but I do feel that to a certain extent that a lot of creators are just almost they're creating it for other creators to enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think that they're trying to go deeper or darker and challenge, you know, in ways that I don't feel like are as mainstream. And, you know, obviously that's great for people who enjoy them, but I don't feel like that's where I get my creative juices flowing. I try to get the stories that will have a broader audience appeal.
Yeah, you've definitely succeeded in that, man. Like I said, each one of these books has a great story in it that you can really sink your teeth into. You know, no matter what the appeal is there. I also want to talk real quick about the artwork in these books. I mean, like I said before, the artwork is very vibrant. Each one is very unique to the story that's being told. You've got some really cool artists working on your book. You've got Jeff Schultz working on Bloodsuckers of Archie fame. Tom Richmond from Married with Children and Mad Magazine. One of the questions I had was, did you have an idea of what artists you wanted to work on each book, or did you go out and seek the artists and let them choose, or how did that go about?
It was definitely intentional. Pretty much every artist I had, I gave a lot of thought to before I approached them about it. I mean, there are some artists who I've not been able to get, but it's not like any of the people who are doing those names you mentioned were people who I knew would be a perfect fit for the book that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes me a little longer to realize that that's the artist that I need. But, for example, Jeff Schultz, from the minute I came up with Super Suckers and said, let's make this a comic, I wanted that Archie style. And I went to the store and looked at what was, at that time, Archie was still publishing in that style. And I didn't, I looked at all the books that they were publishing, and the one artist whose style was the most consistently beautiful and still funny, and, he made all the characters, no matter what they looked like, they were all attractive, and I just felt like the cartooning was just exceptional, and Jeff was the artist whose name was on all of those books. So I got in touch with Jeff, and, and we worked out a deal, and we put that book together, and he's been like the workhorse of the line, because he's always delivering material, and he's consistent, and he's been great. Not to say anyone isn't, but a lot of other artists aren't, as their schedules fill up in different ways. Mm-hmm. And even though when Jeff has another job, he was always, I couldn't keep up with him sometimes, which is a good problem.
Yeah.
And Tom Richmond sort of, when I realized what I wanted was something that Mad Magazine TV and movie parodies, he was the name, and thankfully he was also keen to do some more, to do a longer sort of format than he's been doing on those 6 or 7 page Mad Magazine parodies.
Yeah.
And Ron Friends and Sal, I mean, if I could have named the one artist whose style I've always sort of thought of when I think of Marvel Comics, it's Sal Buscema.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted him involved, and I knew his work with Ron on Spider-Girl. So they were, again, a dream team. And Glenn Whitmore, who Jeff introduced me to, has been a superb partner with the way he's just able to color everything I get. And Marshall Dillon, who's the letterer, he's done a lot more than just lettering. He's really put a lot of care into what I'm doing. Sometimes it just blows me away of what he's able to do, and I don't always have a lot of long deadlines for him on these books. So I've been super lucky, and I've got some more artists and other creators involved with upcoming projects that I think are going to be really exciting. I can announce that Roger Stern, who I'm sure most of older comic book fans are very familiar with his name from his runs on Hulk and Spider-Man.
Oh, wow.
He did a very memorable run on Spider-Man with John Romita Jr. I think, he helped bring the Hobgoblin in. He and John Byrne have a long-time collaboration. They did a memorable short run on Captain America. Roger Stern is co-plotting and scripting the Heroes Union book that's going to be coming out. And Ron Friends is definitely penciling that. So we've got a pretty good group of creators, and I'm excited to, when I can, expand that roster and, keep doing that as well. Todd DeZago, I'm not even sure, I've never heard him actually say his last name to me. He's a longtime collaborator with Mike Waringo, and he also does stuff with Craig Rousseau, who does Startup. Todd's jumping on board to co-plot and script Startup number 3. So
wow.
I feel like there's a lot of, there's a lot more I want to do with this universe of superheroes, and thankfully I've got good collaborators on that.
I briefly want to talk about some of the titles that we have in the store real quick, and maybe just kind of talk about how they came about. Want to talk about the Blue Baron, sort of a Freaky Friday body switch superhero story. Never seen anything like it before. How did that come about, Blue Baron?
Okay, well, I'd say I don't know, I was living in Marina Del Rey. I remember this. It was about 18 years ago, and I came up with this idea where a business guy who got superpowers, and it was like a dark version of what Blue Baron is now. It was like for whatever reason, I thought it should be edgier and dark. Maybe that was because I was in my 20s and early 30s. I don't know.
That's about everybody.
And I didn't have kids yet. But it was just that time in my life where I thought, oh, this would be a cool sort of edgy sort of story. And I didn't know what to do with it. there was a variation. I came up with another sitcom that might have had some connection to that, but I never ended up taking anything with it until I got Sal Buscema on the phone, and he was keen to work on something. And I actually invited him aboard before I really knew what I wanted him to do. And then I remembered that story, and I thought, well, what if I make it a funnier story and make the hero sort of comedically costumed without making it a joke? But it's like, it's an anachronistic costume, as you can see. It's from the 1770s. So the idea is to bring the humor out of the costume, and the fact that, you know, when you do a body swap, everybody's sort of familiar with what that means comedically, and I felt like that hook, and, you know, it's not the freshest hook, but I feel like in superheroes it's got room to, you got room to entertain a mainstream audience with that idea. So that was where it got into it, and then it started as like a 25-page story that I just kept expanding until I was like, you know what, I'll just get Ron. Once I had Ron Friends on board, it was like there was no reason to stop where I'd originally planned to stop. So that turned into a 50-some page book that has now grown into, I'm working on issue 3, or Ron's already penciling issue 3, and that'll put us up to like 150 pages, 180 pages. So it's been a wild ride, but I love that story because it's about a teenager who's sort of the zero of his school, and there's an accident, and he and this iconic superhero who's kind of a joke to the younger superhero fans that live in a world with real superheroes. Yeah. They end up switching bodies, and the hero and Zero switch bodies, and it's fun because these are flawed characters, because they've gotten so comfortable with who they are that suddenly getting out, and in some cases comfortable for the teenager, but not in a good way, because he's just used to being abused and whatnot by his classmates, picked on and bullied. Suddenly having superpowers is a great gift, and then it's like a dream come true. And then for the superhero who's, you know, is a pretty entitled guy, he's got a business, that he's multi-millionaire, he's got superpowers, he's attractive, suddenly living in this nightmare world where he's got parents telling him to go to bed and what to do, and kids picking on him. It just has flowed really well, and you know, I enjoy the fact that these are flawed characters, and that they're making mistakes when they're in each other's bodies, as opposed to the typical, you know, dark or edgy or, you know, characters who sort of know what they're doing from the minute they put on the costume.
Blue Baron is definitely, like, I mean, like you said, it's a fun story. There's so much possibility there. I can't wait to see where it goes.
Well, I'm really excited about issue 2 of that. I feel like I'm starting to get, it was like, that was the first issue of Blue Baron I sort of came up with, realized I was breaking it into chapters and things like that. I feel like with issue 2, I've got the drama and the comedy all sort of working really well together. Yeah. So I think if you tried issue 1 and you weren't sure, you know, for $4 more, you get another 60 pages, and you'll really, I think, be really invested in those two characters by the end of issue 2.
It's definitely a great book. Like I said, it's in my pull file. I can't wait to see where it goes. Something I want to talk about, you know, about sort of like the teenage experience, going in talking about Telepathetic. Just a really funny book. What I enjoy about it is Telepathetic is basically this book that sort of delves into that teenage experience, that age in life where we're all trying to put forth this image of, you know, this cool image of who we are, but then, you know, when people can start reading your minds, that's just a recipe for some hilarity right there. Can you talk about Telepathetic for a little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to. There's actually a television pilot that we shot that I wrote about 10 years ago.
Oh.
And it was called Telepathetic, and I was very happy with the way the pilot went. Unfortunately, the network had issues with the lead actor, one of the lead actors, and it became a case of, well, we want this show to go forward, but we can't do it with this actor. So we went through 6 months. I was living in London, which was another great experience, writing a sitcom for the BBC. I had to come back and spend 6 months recasting it. We never did find anyone better than the original character, the actor. So that sort of died, and it was a real difficult thing because it seemed like it was positioned to get on the air and run for a while, but it didn't get past the pilot because of those issues that I said. And so Telepathetic just was almost in some ways the catalyst for me doing this, the art. It's funny because I think people see a lot of what I'm doing as retro, even though the characters are new. That's intent. But like, I want a classic look. People who really regularly go to comic stores are most interested in that book because it sort of looks more modern, as it were. Despite its cartooniness, I think it doesn't feel like just, you know, the Archie style or the old 70s Marvel or the Mad magazine. It's got its own unique style, and I think that is one of the reasons it appeals to comic book readers. But, you know, once you get into the story, hopefully it's everybody's story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think everybody can relate to it. I mean, everybody, like I said, you know, it reminds me of those teenage years.
They're really fun to write, and I've got the second issues about halfway drawn, and hopefully that'll be part of next January's wave. And, you know, the stuff in that really should entertain. If you like the first issue, you're going to love that second issue too. So, you know, like, it's really great. You can just feel characters really starting to come to life. So it takes less energy to think of what they're going to be doing, and that's one of the great things about Telepathetic. It's like, it's just fun to get those characters back together again to tell a new story.
Audiences want characters that are real these days. What I really enjoy about Startup is that you have a single mom who's gotten these powers, and she's going out there and she's using them for good. But one of the things I really enjoy about Startup is her relationship with her son. And it's sort of like she kind of comes to him for guidance every now and then. She's not just doing these heroic deeds because it's the right thing, but it's like she's also trying to keep in mind that, you know, I've got to set a good example for my son. I think that's a very powerful dynamic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can definitely say that I'm trying with the, you know, you see the time slot rating, and we can talk more about that, but I try with the 7 and 8 o'clock titles to make family comics for families to enjoy together. And I definitely feel like a big part of that is that I have my own family now, and I don't think I could have ever created these worlds before I had those kids of my own. But I feel like I have them in my mind when I'm writing and telling these stories, especially the superhero books, because I want them to feature families. And, you know, Ernie is part of a family, despite the fact that he's got the Blue Baron's head in his body now. He's going to live in a family, and those are people he has to become, you know, familiar with. And I just feel like, and then the third book that's coming out next January with Stephen Gordon art is called Headhunter, and there's a huge family component to that really makes the book itself feel like it's, even though the character in the universe has been around a while, it's like an origin story for how he's going to live his life from that point on. And it's all about family. And, you know, the relationship between Renee and her son Malcolm in Startup is definitely trying to own the reality of a superhero having a kid who's that age. You know, you want to include that. You can't exclude them from any part of your life. And if you can include them and they can be helpful to you, that's a big plus. And I think that's definitely, I appreciate your mentioning it. It's definitely intended. And it continues throughout in issue 3 as we plotted it out. There's a lot of Malcolm, and you just got to keep that family dynamic is really important to who Renee and Startup is. So expect more of it.
Can you tell us anything about what we can expect to see in the future from Sitcomics or any upcoming titles?
Well, I've teased a few things. I mean, Roger Stern's doing that book for me with Ron Friends. That may not be in the next batch, but Protege from the Heroes Union is going to be in a spin-off title that will give him a bit more to do and will change the status quo for him in that universe. There's a Western title that I've got a guy named Randy Bishop drawing. Oh, and the Protege book would be Corinne Howe, who's done stuff with Ghostbusters, Oni Press, and she's really a great artist, and I'm really excited about having her. I mean, there's a lot more ideas and artists. Renee Reeser-Zelnick is an artist who did a couple of the Sit commercials. She's drawing a book that is also in the superhero universe. I honestly could continue to do this forever if I could afford to. I'm obviously, I'm you know, using the money that I've made from selling my collection of comics on eBay and also from working in television. And I have a Netflix pilot, but you never know where the next project is going to go. So I'm doing what I can while I can, and always with these series, there is no end to them. I can continue to. Tom Richmond's ready to do another issue of Z People when I'm ready to do that. Super Suckers, we're well on our way with issue 5, Blue Baron 3. It's all about, finding an audience, and not everybody that comes into comic stores is aware of them or excited about them, and that's somewhat part of the DNA of the comics. They are meant to be for families, and not everybody who's in a comic book store is ready to admit that they're part of a family sometimes. Yeah. But, and then the 9 o'clock books are a little edgier, but they're not really meant to be turning off anyone who's over a teenage, who's over 13. So, the rambly answer is that there's a lot coming out, and there's a lot to get excited about. And I'm glad that, your store is, Golden Age is carrying these books. I really tried to be specific about not overdoing it, because I've invented a new distribution system that sort of owns the fact that so few publishers get ordered in comic stores in the first place, and they, nowadays publishers just have to ask people to pre-order, or the stores will never carry it. Well, this is a distribution system that sort of owns that and says, this is how it will work. And I got a really great response, and even with the small number of stores, I sold a lot of comic books when the books came out on January 31st of this year, and look for more of the same next January 31st, hopefully with a lot more stores.
Awesome. Well, yes, Darin, we're very excited, and we, like I said, we're here at the Golden Age. We're very happy to have the books here. Very excited to see what's coming up next, folks. This is the time you got to jump in on these binge books and Sitcomics. There's going to be, like Darin said, there's going to be a lot more coming down the road. We can't wait to see it. So come in here, pick these books up. Darin, thank you so much for taking your time. I know you're a busy man. You've got kids. You've got Sitcomics.
I got comics. I got a TV pilot I got to be writing, and there's a lot of all good stuff though, thankfully. And it's really great with David and everybody there at the Golden Age has been really just so supportive and so positive. And I do feel like if you're looking for a full entertainment package, the binge book format is for you. You've got a $4 price point, but you've also got a trade's worth of entertainment, and these worlds aren't going anywhere. You just need to invest a little bit of money, and you get a lot of enjoyment. So really, you're supporting Golden Age as much as you're supporting the publisher, but I think that you're really also giving yourself a full piece of entertainment, which is what I think everybody's looking for.
Definitely. Folks, come in and pick these up. Darin, once again, thank you for joining us on the Golden Standard. Hopefully we'll get you out here to the store in person sometime.
I would love that. Yeah, yes,
Definitely. This has been another edition of the Golden Standard. We hope you guys have a great week, and we will see you in the store. Bye.